Welcome to Conversations with Shlomi.
Hi, I'm Shlomi, your host. I've discovered that vulnerable conversations lead to some of my richest insights and personal growth experiences. So join me as I sit down with guests who inspire me, and let's explore our ups, downs, and everything in between.
Enjoy listening.
Yeah.
I just enjoy being here with you. You're a dear brother,
Same.
and it's just
Thank
nice
you.
to be on the journey with you.
I was just looking, we discussed that I want to talk to you a little bit about sex addiction, healthy sexuality. And I just looked at the clock. 45 minutes had just elapsed without even getting to the topic that we set out to. And I think it's a testament to, I could do this all day. This is a topic that I'm involved in a lot. It's become something that's near and dear to me in terms of work and bringing a form of change away from the shame and the secrecy in our community. So, what is sex addiction?
Okay, so I'd love to start with the idea that sex addiction, in many respects, has very little to do with sex. And I always appreciated that teaching. Remember when I first started training in what is sex addiction and what are we really talking about here? I trained with Patrick Carnes, who is really the originator. And I remember that first day, and it's something I've seen, and it's been fairly consistent in my life when I have a chance to meet people that have made an impact on the world in some way, that there's a deep vulnerability that lives inside of them. There's a yearning and a tenderness. And it was no different with Patrick Carnes. He walked in that first day and he actually just got the news that sex addiction was not going to be placed in the DSM-5. He just walked out of a conference where that was the case, and he was filled with tears and mourning, and he was mourning for the fact that he knows, he understands this suffering. He's been this close to this suffering for years, most of his life, and he gets it so deeply. And if something is not included in the DSM, it means that it's only private pay. The only way that you could really get care for this problem is if you pay out of pocket. And to him, he was just mourning that loss, saying I know the millions of people out there that are suffering in their silence. And now we continue to keep them there unless they have the means to make their way out of it. But I remember his first teaching that he gave over is sex addiction. We often look at it through the lens, and this one I speak to a group of men about this. They glorify it. They look at it as something of a jock mentality, as opposed to looking at it for what it truly is. But they see it as oh, this person is doing this. They're engaged in all this behavior. How cool, so to speak, or how expressive of their manhood. And the reality is that the closer you get to this phenomenon, the more you realize that behind it, it's not just about a sexual conquest that many people would just naturally trend towards, but it's about a deep seeking of comfort and connection and affirmation that's emerging from a person that doesn't quite know, for a variety of reasons and circumstances in their lives. They don't quite know how to get to that place, how to feel connection in a way that we would call possibly more normative. When, let's say, you primarily look at yourself as someone that's unlovable. Now, there are many ways to arrive at a conclusion that I'm an unlovable person. But the most obvious pathway is that you weren't loved. There wasn't a person there that gave you over a message that you could internalize that says, I'm a lovable person. And we have biological needs for connection, not only in a physical way, but also an emotional, spiritual way. We have these needs to be connected to others. And in order to be connected in a real way, there has to be some self-worth behind it. There has to be some vulnerability to say, I'm going to share myself with another, even metaphorically speaking. Sexuality itself, it's a deeply revealed experience if one allows it to be. It's one where all of you is present without all your protections. Even metaphorically, you're not wearing clothing to protect you from being seen. And some of us are more willing to engage in such an experience like that because we're okay with another seeing us. But if someone lives with a deeper belief about themselves, that let's say I'm unlovable or I'm not worthy enough, it's not like their needs go away, but their ability to actually acquire those needs become profoundly more difficult to sit with. So they embark on a journey of like a vulnerability that is controlled or an intimacy that is controlled. So they're seeking that the same thing the rest of us are seeking, but they don't quite have access to that. So the way that they get it is through this means of physical sexuality. So they have an encounter for a moment, but it's all controlled. It's not a real form of intimacy where one could truly allow themselves to be with another and to be seen and engaged in that way. So to me, sex addiction, it plays out in the arena of sexuality, but fundamentally it started well before a person was even introduced to those experiences.
So it's an attachment, a relational issue that
At its
expresses
core.
itself in.
Yeah, at its core. Meaning, because when you think about sexuality is attachment, it is relational, and all of it is going to depend on one's ability to be free in such a space. And if it fundamentally isn't free to be, then they're just engaged in an act. They're not engaged in anything beyond that.
So just briefly going back, why isn't it today a universally accepted pathology? Why do we, like the ICD-11, I think, adopted it recently,
Yeah.
but still there are so many professionals walking around and teaching different modalities that if you want to say that sexuality is a compulsion, and they have like a very hard time coming around to this idea. What is the resistance to it?
I think at its core, the disagreement is in religiosity and shame. I think that's what people are struggling with. Most people will say the only reason why you're having as difficulty with this issue is not because the issue is a problem. It's that you come from a world which tells you that you should have shame with that issue. So I think that the fundamental conflict is between the people. And you'll see this a lot. Many of the people who are in SA come from religious backgrounds. That's the truth. You go to any SA meeting throughout the world, you're going to find that it's filled with whatever the demographic is. You're near the Catholics, there'll be lots of Catholics. You're near the Protestants. You go to a meeting near Jewish communities, it's going to be filled with religious Jews. And many of the researchers on the outside are saying that it's not really an issue per se. It's an issue in certain environments that have like this moral ideal that this should be puritanical, and so they're sort of disagreeing with the premise altogether, and saying it's a shame issue much more than it is an actual clinical issue.
And I think there's some truth to it, and I want to touch upon that.
Tremendous amount of truth. There's a lot.
But it also erases people that have had their bottoms ripped out from them, regardless of their religious orientations, or if they have any religious backgrounds or so on, where they've uncontrollably can't stop and ruin their lives in some form.
Now, clearly, I'm on the side of hoping and believing that it should belong in the DSM. But I at least I have an understanding of what the other side is saying. They're saying this is really a relational problem. It's a marital problem. It's a connection problem. It's not a sex problem. So I understand what they're saying and what they're trying to get at. But clearly, I've chosen my side, and I've chosen my side because I've sat with so many beautifully wounded people who shared that inner space with me. And when you encounter something like that, you can't disagree with it. You can't philosophize about something that you've actually sat with because you know it in your bones.
Right. So we know that one of the drivers behind sex addiction is a lot of shame and a lot of religious guilt. So, and you work in a very religious community.
Yeah.
How does one even begin to separate whether they are dealing with a form of religious guilt that is compounding, whether they are actually struggling with a form of compulsion, or when a client comes and they carry like this deep shame and guilt around some of their actions, but maybe this is, like you said, more relational, more religiously driven. Where do we begin? How do we even begin to separate all of it?
It takes time. It takes time to separate that, because the first initial contact you're going to have with a person, they're going to present with all of this. They're going to present with the shame. They're going to present with the behaviors. And it's hard to begin to separate, like, where does the shame end and potentially the addiction begins? Because by and large, and this is an interesting area of research, religiosity usually is a very protective factor for most issues. It's a protective factor even for depression. It's a protective factor for relationships, meaning the fact that you're living with a higher power, the fact that you're living with ideals and virtues that are a part of the built-in system sort of keeps you in that place. But when it comes to sexuality, our research, religiosity gets canceled out by the shame. When you look at the differences between what's happening in our world and other worlds, when you do this comparison, let's say with like alcoholism, you're going to find that there we certainly have a great deal of alcoholism in our community, but you're going to have lower rates of alcoholism in our community than you can have in others, because we have this religious protective factor. But when it comes to sexuality, it seems to fall away. Like our world, the behaviors are not very different than other worlds, in terms of masturbation, in terms of pornography. Like the statistics are not very different. You'll even find studies that will suggest that religious worlds have higher rates of that behavior. And the understanding that I've always had of that is, once you're caught up in a shame cycle, you're feeling terrible about yourself, you're feeling bad, you're feeling broken. We can only tolerate so much of that shame before we need to find a way to relieve ourselves of that shame. So like the cycle intensifies as we continue to move forward, that the shame becomes greater and the need to relieve that shame becomes greater as well. So in our world, we're going to have, similar behaviors as any other world, simply because we have the shame factor fueling all of it, which seems to get in the way. So I think in the beginning in our world, we have to understand that no matter what the work is going to look like, before we even get to the question, is this a shame response, but what we would call normative behavior, or is this really problematic behavior? One way or another, you're going to have to face that shame first. And usually when the shame is at least diminished a little bit and moved to the side, then you could start looking at the phenomenon. Like, okay, is the behavior something that is, pathological or clinical, or is it within some range of normal? But it's a difficult thing in any religious environment to try to decipher that, because any behavior elicits shame. Any experience lets you know that there's something wrong. I always appreciated, I was putting a curriculum together many years ago for like our world, the yeshiva world, and it was a little bit more modern, let's say, the environment where I was in at the time, but still embodies all the ideals. And I was putting together this curriculum for developing young men, teenagers making their way through this struggle in a deep way. And I reached out to Moshe Weinberger to get some like guidance, like what really is the end game. I always like to start that way. And I think in therapy, we should do the same. Like, who is this person in front of me? What are they potentially capable of? And what does that end game look like for them? So we could then start figuring out, okay, what do we need to move to the side or resolve in order to get there? So I started the same way. What's the end game? How do you want someone in our world to make their way out of their adolescence, make their way into marriage feeling with regards to this issue? And I so deeply appreciated his response, where he said, it's not so much about the behaviors. He goes, move the behaviors to the side. He goes, to me, if we could have our people making their way out of their adolescence and still believing that, yes, I struggled and this has been difficult. And we know this to be the case, that over 90% of people, of men, struggle with this issue. Yet I'm still, even though I struggle, I'm still valuable. I'm still beloved in Hashem's eyes. I still have a part of me that's deeply connected and intact to my own soul. Even though I embarked on this, he goes, that would be the ultimate form of success. That we could have people leaving that experience not being destroyed by their own shame. And that's the thing that's getting us the most. Biologically, we're designed to fail in this area to some degree, at least on a minor level. That doesn't mean you let go of the reins and you say, okay, because I'm biologically destined to fail, then, the heck with it from before I even get started. But there are certain things in life that we don't automatically resolve. We work through, we develop through. And this is one of those things. I think when I was younger, I was so frustrated. I almost had like tainas on Hashem. Like, what are you doing? This is how it sounded like in my head. You bring us all here, and before we even get started, we're going to fail. We're going to have to confront things within ourselves that are just so terrible, and they're devastating to us. Why is that okay? Like I would question the design. Like, what's up with the design? Doesn't make sense to me. Like, why bring us here to suffer that way? And then you learn through life a little bit that we develop through these encounters. Who we become is a person who engages in that struggle. And we become defined by how we respond to that struggle. And it's not so much about the black and whites of yes and no, or did I or did I not, but it becomes about who did I emerge, how did I become me as someone who made their way through that particular conflict. There's value to the conflict itself, as opposed to there just us being relieved of the conflict to begin with. And it's in that experience that we find ourselves.
Okay, I want to reflect this back. Landed very deeply. I really appreciated like the question that you put to Rav Moshe. What is the end? Like, how do I want someone to emerge from their adolescence into early adulthood? Do we need to have them stop the behavior? Can they never masturbate or never struggle with it? Or what are we trying to do? And I think to put this a little bit to the way questioning the design, is that even possible? It seems like that's almost impossible. And the idea was that, or is that, we want to have the person emerge intact, actually understanding the struggle as a human struggle, as this is something that will always be part of my growth path. So the same way I want to be a kind person. And I sometimes in the schoolyard, especially when I'm challenged sometimes with friendships and wondering if they love me or don't love me, I act unkind. But what I want to emerge is become kinder, more able to handle adversity and be okay with it, speaking less ill of other people. There's a journey towards being responsible with my sexuality. I'm adding words here. I'm sorry.
No. They're beautiful. Thank you.
But never to forget that it's the human struggle of becoming aware of ourselves and growing and being aware of our desires, and to go at this and say that it can never be done and it should never be done will leave a person broken, because by definition they might not even be able to get to that level.
Yeah. Again, I think it's okay to say, I think we need to acknowledge the halacha. We need to acknowledge the spiritual ramifications, and speak about them too. But when that becomes like the only experience, when when you think about our education with sexuality in general, it's very, very limited to begin with. But when it does show up, it almost shows up in one form in particular, the very black and white, right and wrong form. That's like the only form. I had one Rebbe along the way that gave us a little bit more than the black and white. He introduced a tiny bit of gray, and I can't tell you, like, as an emerging, yeshiva bacher, like that was, I like clung to the gray because it was so helpful to hear that. And all he said was approach sexuality not through the lens of Ian, but instead approach it through the lens of Bacchius. Like, don't delve so deeply into it. Like, move on. Like, it's not meant to be analyzed so deeply. If it happens and you're there and you're a part of it, encounter that experience, but move on with your life. And I remember that being like, that was like the closest message I heard that sounded even remotely healthy to me. Because everyone else was just, it was just shame. That was the only story. It was just shame. Now I think we need to confront that shame. We need to deal with that shame. I think one of the ways that people try to resolve shame is act as if it's not there and avoid the shame altogether. And I don't think that helps us develop. We develop by encountering the things that are difficult with us and grappling with it and then emerging on the other side in whatever form. But that process elevates us. It makes us stronger as human beings. But I think the idea of like, I think people try to find creative ways to work around the shame. And I'm saying, don't work around it. Acknowledge it, face it, interact with it, see what's there. But then try to get a little bit flexible with it. And I think there's so many parts of us that we need, that are left in a state of yearning where we say, if only, I wish I was this, and instead we could look at life through the lens of becoming, that our job is not to live in a state of resolve. Our job is to live in a state where we're seeking something more for ourselves. And we're in a state of engagement with our growth. As opposed to like, I want to be there already. I think when we're there already, that's our last moment in life where it's time for us to depart. We did it. Gewaldig. We give ourselves a pat on the back and said, let me throw myself a party. I did it. But beyond that, we're in a state of doing. And I think we could see this through many things in our life, that most of us don't realize this, but most of us have overcome thousands of things in our life. But the only reason why we don't live that way is because we live in a state of becoming. How many times did we all tell ourselves, oh, if I get to this weight, I'm going to feel good. Or if I get to this amount of money, I'm going to feel good. Or if I have this, and many times we've surpassed that, but we never get the satisfaction of it because we all live in a state of tension at all times. We wake up to this, you get this straight from Tanya, that we're all a Benoni. We're all in that state of, am I choosing the better part of myself, or am I choosing, the more animalistic, physical part of myself? And that's engaging life. But I think most of us try to look at it through, I just want to be in a state of arrival. And the truth is, states of arrival are usually boring. They don't give us nearly what we imagine it would give us. There are obviously moments we want to really celebrate achievements, that we overcame something and we dedicated ourselves to something. But the state of arrival almost always just creates a new destination for us to seek. We never get to, we don't get to bask in that arrival. And the truth is, why should we? That's not the purpose of life, to just be in a place of, hey, I arrived. Have a moment where you acknowledge it, you appreciate yourself and the journey that you were on. But then the second later, we're like, okay, where do I need to go next? And that's what it means to be alive. It's wonderful and terrifying.
There's a Buddhist saying that comes to mind, that if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. And it's interpreted like, if someone tells you an idea that it's about the arrival and you have arrived and you've met it, you're here,
Yeah.
you missed the entire idea of what this life is about. It's about the journey, about constantly moving towards rather than arriving at any given state. Historically, why do you think we know, let's say, the Baal Shem Tov speaks about Lashon Hara, speaking ill of someone, and he says there's a spiritual death of three people: the person speaking, the person listening, and the person being spoken about. There's a form of spiritual death that they experience when someone speaks ill. Seems pretty. It seems pretty strong and intense, and somehow we were able to transmit this idea as an ideal of reaching to working towards to. But the idea of sexuality is transmitted in this very black and white idea that you have to have arrived. You can never fail or struggle. Why do you think historically that happened?
That's a beautiful question. A really deep question. I don't know if I'm going to be able to satisfy it, to be honest. I need to think about it more. Listen, there's something about sexuality that that lives in a different sphere than most things. It has in it qualities that are almost like an embodiment of so much of us. There's a reason why Freud sort of settled on sexuality as being one of like the primary motivators that lives inside of us. He didn't just make that up. It's something he saw and experienced. It holds in it like our desire to be held. It holds in it our desire to experience and to live with mystery and fantasy. It's got everything in it. So I think just to begin with, it does live in a different sphere, a different category. And I need to think more. I don't want to give an answer. I could. I have thoughts in my head I could say, but I don't think that they're really honest because I didn't think about it enough. So I'd love to think about it. Could we do that in part 2? We'll come back and start with that question. It's a beautiful question, and I think sexuality is its own category. That's for sure. It means things. It touches fundamental things that other experiences don't necessarily even get close to. That's for sure. But I also think there's a lot of shame about it. There's a lot of guilt. And again, this goes all the way back to Adam and Chava. It's like one of the first lessons we receive in the Torah. The first acknowledgments is that our nakedness is something that we should run from. Our nakedness is something that we should be embarrassed of. So it's obviously deeply fundamental. But I'd love to find more words to kind of answer that question adequately.
And maybe just to put a little idea, like it's and I think about this, and I don't. Something that has come to my mind is that in Kabbalah, also Hasidus, more modern, there's everything is put into the context of a form of energy exchange between the male and the female, and a lot of sexuality, a lot of sexual imagery of the flow, God, the Shekhinah being female, and the male energies in the exchange. And there's a story told that the Baal Shem Tov, in one of his spiritual inquiries, once went to ask one of the Kabbalistic masters, like, why does everything have to be put in that context? And he said, I think he metaphorically told him, do it better. Here is a pen, write it better. And the Baal Shem Tov explained that the entire idea of why sexuality as we know it today exists and is part of our avodah and journey in life is to learn how to connect with God. For us to learn the depth of a relationship and what can be a real relationship, which would also, on the flip side, how much seriousness and how much expression and how much depth is specifically in that field, more so, like you said, than in anything else.
Yeah.
But it doesn't answer my question.
Yeah, no, but it's a beautiful. It's trending in the right direction. You know, it's. I don't think this question has like a deeply satisfactory answer. I think it's because it's so many things. It's so many things, but it's a beautiful idea. It really is.
So when someone comes to treatment and you notice that it's a lot of their tension around their sex addiction, compulsion, and their behaviors in it really stems from a very, very negative relationship with either self or with the idea of sexuality. What direction, and maybe this is for someone who is listening to this and they're noticing that they have a tenuous relationship with their own sexuality, what would you tell them to look at? So maybe for that person going to a program and saying, I'm an addict, and I struggle with addiction is not really the right answer, because it is more of a relational issue.
Yeah.
It's more of a getting a certain comfortability around their sexual self. What would be your words of encouragement, advice to a person like this?
Well, I think that we all have tension in this space. There are varying degrees in how much tension we carry, but I think a lot of it begins with like a deep dive into why is this phenomenon living in me with the degree of tension and the grip that it has on me. And I think that almost always opens up a pathway to understanding a little bit that this experience is not only connected to this experience. It's not just about sexuality. It's almost always linked with self-worth, self-value, flexibility, the ability to tolerate oneself in difficult moments, the ability to regulate one's shame. And that there's always a story to that. There's always contributing factors. And to me, like looking at the phenomenon of sexuality through the lens of the broader scope of life becomes like a real gateway to beginning to resolve what you're talking about. And there are people, like you said, and I appreciate you saying it, that there are people that it's not about that. It's what we call a behavior that's become functionally autonomous. Alan Wheeler speaks about this idea. I've always appreciated it, where it may have originated in some type of wound, but over time it developed a life force of its own. And at that point, you need to address the life force. Going to the Buddhist psychologists, they refer to this as like a form of double dukkha, which is like a pain that has removed itself from the original pain itself. And then you have to directly address the behavior and then the pain. But you're talking about the person that the behaviors are not necessarily a huge factor in the journey, but rather it's just the shame. And when we start looking at, the origins of that shame, usually it's not only in an area of sexuality, usually it lands there, but it begins in many other contexts and lives in many other spaces. So understanding that, like the fear of making a mistake, where did that come from? And often we trace these to the moments in our lives where we made a mistake, consciously or unconsciously. We didn't realize yet that making a mistake was a problem. And how was that received? How was that met? What was that met with? And did that cause you to need to hide a little bit? Did that cause you to need to hide a lot? And when the answer starts trending in this very common direction of many experiences that elicited a need for me to run, to hide, to protect, and it's very easy in a religious context for all that energy to land in the realm of sexuality. But like Patrick Carnes says, it's not really about sexuality. It's really about something else. Even sexual fantasy is not really about sexuality. It has like emotional equivalency. There are other expressions that are there, and it's not just about like an act, an experience. It's, like the person who feels small. It's very common for them to have fantasies where they feel bigger and more powerful. They're more of a conqueror in that space. So it's a resolution to an internal construct that person's ultimately living with. And helping a person understand that your relationship to this is an embodiment of your relationship to yourself, first and foremost. And it has an origin story. It'll make sense one day. And I always find it's a holy day when a client could really embrace that idea, when they could really say to themselves, like, I get why I did what I did. I get how that at one point in my life enabled me to survive. And I also get how today it's interfering with my ability to thrive and to really be. But I understand why that was the mechanism by which I was able to relieve myself.
I want to stay for another moment on the theoretical side of I know that one of the ideas of one of the existentialism was, and Bugenthal is somebody you always loved to refer to in terms of in school. I think in
One of my Rebbes.
is one of your rabbis. And I was thinking about, leading up to our conversation today, I was thinking about the idea of self-alienation. At the core, his belief was that the need for us, our pain that we struggle in our journeys, we feel alienated from our true self. And as the therapist meeting our client, we want to help our client to get more in touch again with that self. And also in our own avoida, I think if you would look, Tanya, is to bring the tension between the animalistic spirit and the spiritual spirit into cohesion, that they can work together rather than against each other. In the context of acting out in sexual compulsion, in some ways it feels like it is almost a very deep expression of self-alienation. It can either be when I am in a very healthy sexual space and in congruence with myself, then I am very much true to myself. But on the other hand, that if I can't bring that cohesion, I alienate myself. And the more I do so, the more alienated I feel. And it kind of really drives that cycle.
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, if you have any thoughts on this, how you see it.
Well, I think it's important, even when I think you're right, that it is an alienation of self. It's a form of dishonoring oneself. And because we know what we could do, what we could be. And this is tapping into the survival part of us as opposed to the thriving part of us. But I think it's important to not lose sight of the fact that even though it's an alienating part of ourselves, we're distancing ourselves from what we could and should be in life. The moment it's an attempt to actualize oneself, meaning the actual experience, even though it's deeply alienating, the lived experience of it is seeking affirmation for something. Now manifests as alienation because there's no way to be in that experience and have it actually actualize you. That's like if a person's deep into their fantasy world, they could like construct that this is an expression of me. But very few people actually do that. You have to be deep into that fantasy. So it's important, even though there's a form of self-alienation, its intent is actually self-expression. But it manifests in the world as self-alienation. And I think that's it's a valuable point. Because I think when you meet a person there, like when you meet a person in the fact that I know you're attempting to express yourself, but this is not really it. That's a real moment for them. It's a real moment. But there's when we're talking about honoring ourselves and moving away from self-alienation, instead like self-embodiment, there's so much to talk about there. Just like for a person, even at the very least, knowing that there is a self waiting there to be expressed. There is a state of arrival where the embodiment of your life and the expression of that self that was given to you by Hashem could come closer to one another, and a person could feel more whole with who they are. Even knowing that, I think for many people, they don't look at it through the lens of this is me trying to actualize myself so I can live in a world more wholesomely. They look at it through the lens of I'm doing something and I'm either better or worse. And it's like this objective scale. And what I'm suggesting is don't look at it objectively, but rather engage it subjectively. You know what it means to honor yourself the same way I know what it means to honor myself. But I don't quite know what you need to do to honor yourself. You do. I don't have access to that. and approaching life through that subjective lens of saying, what does it mean for me to get closer to my essence? And what takes me further away or distances me from that reality? And I think there's a lot to talk about just in that area.
I want to get a couple of practical things. So, a message to parents who have an adolescent, young, emerging adult. What would be the most helpful thing that you can tell them that can, in some ways, create like either a journey to shame or a journey to, like you said, to make, like you had discussed with Moshe Weinberger, to allow the person emerge stronger and more in touch with who they are as they embark on this journey? What would it be?
First of all, I think it's important to acknowledge that this is a person's individual journey. You know, it's actually at the point in life where it hits is when you're leaving dependency, and you're forging a path forward in terms of your own sense of independence. So I don't think this is a journey. Parents are the surrounding factors, the noise that's impacting that moment. But I think it's each person's individual journey to take. But I think parents could do their part in making sure they could contribute that a little bit less shame. And to put it in like simple terms, I think to make it more about the subjective than the objective. When it's about the subjective and the experience, when you're able to convey to a child, like, you were born to struggle with this. This is not something that's reflective of whether or not you're good or bad, but this is a challenge that's faced before you. And you're the only one who could face it. But I just want you to know that you're not bad. You're not different. You're not alone, even though you live with the whole experience of this in absolute silence, and we all do. But just know that you're not alone in this experience. Like, everyone around you is experiencing that as well. I learned early on, I used to work with teenagers in the high school, and there was like a certain look that I was able to identify even before they opened their mouth. Literally a certain look. They'd walk into the office and I'm like, okay, I know what's coming. And it often sounds like it's like this gush of emotion and this rush of shame. And they describe themselves in the most animalistic, horrific terms available to them. And it's in that moment where you get to say, and hopefully it reaches them, but almost always it doesn't. But you still say it anyway, with the hopes that, alavavcha, that'll seep in. It does, you can't stick things directly into others' hearts, but you could place it on top and hope that they're going to integrate it at some point, where you tell them, like, hey, do you realize that everyone that's sitting around you in the classroom and in your Gemara shir or your science class, whatever it might be, do you know that they're feeling the same tension, that they're grappling with the same stuff? And almost always that person, the response is, what are you talking about? There's no way. And what they're sharing is that I am the only person in the world that's embodying this. And that's when you know that they're living in an objective world. They're not able to see anything beyond that experience. And I think there's a way to convey to a child, I know this struggle. Not only have I been there, but we've all largely been there. I could honestly say I know one person in my world that like somehow found a way, and I believe him, but he's the only one guy in my world that I could say,
I
like,
have that
somehow,
one too.
Yeah, one. I
I've
know
met
one guy.
person.
I know one person. And again, I've heard other people say that they don't struggle. I just don't believe them the same way. But I know one guy that says that, and I actually believe him, because I know him. I know his heart. He's an authentic man, and he describes it, by the way, as I realized early on that this was going to be a struggle, and I just told myself just to stay away from it. Like, he did it, and it wasn't a very deep, complex situation. He's just like, I avoided the conflict on some level.
Yeah, the person I know says, I discovered Tanya too early and I took it too much to heart.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
So I want to talk to you a couple of like very practical things. Especially in very frum communities, there's an idea that it seems like I hear a lot about Chassan Kala teachers teaching the opposite of the message of She'era Tzusa Va'ona, that it is on the man to provide the pleasure for the wife, that there's some form of obligation for the Kala teachers teaching their young charges, that they need to make sure that their husband is always satisfied, so that he doesn't spill his seed, that he doesn't have Zera Lavatala.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it
Well,
creates situations of a lot of discord, going almost as large as sometimes marital rape. What do you make of that, and what do you have to say to that?
I say that it's terrible, and like that's all we could do is mourn that message and say, like, I can't believe that's the elevated message. Like, especially when you're talking about something as lofty as intimacy, that we turn it into, like, we're approaching it on its most basic base level of just about attending to needs, and that's the dialogue that we're having. And there's something so sad about that simply becomes the extent by which we're talking about something that's so profound, and then we're diminishing it to tending to needs. And again, I'm not suggesting we don't talk about the necessity of tending to needs. They're really important, and we should. But that being the message, or the primary message, that, oh, there's an encounter that you're about to walk into, and let's talk about your roles. Your role is to make sure you're available to tend to the needs of another. It just makes me want to cry. That's what people are hearing, and that's how some people are living. And like, it's almost like teaching the Torah, like, only through the lens of what you should do and shouldn't do. It's almost like you learn the Torah from a halacha book or a sefer, as opposed to, you completely miss the spirit. You completely miss that it's about teaching you how to live your life, not just in terms of behaviors, but how to think and how to engage and how to interact, how to live fully. And to diminish that to something that is just a behavior, to me, is like a real loss. Now, again, is it a good first step? Sure. But the fact that that's where the message ends, and that becomes the function of it, I think it's important to say that I think that I don't know of a community that's not moving away from that idea. Meaning, I know those ideas have been around for a long time, but as we become more aware, more comfortable with ourselves, as we enter into this era of people that are seeking profound things, people are not just looking to, check. I did, like, Freud's world, his definition of health was you could go to work and you could maintain a loving relationship. That was his ideal. That's what he was working towards. Today, the ideal is, I want to talk to God. I want to have encounters that are full and real and vibrant. That's our generation. So the message of, this is just about you satisfying a role or taking care of an urge in another person, is like the most base level of sexuality, and it's beyond like a complete distortion of what it's supposed to be. Koheles doesn't talk about it being just an act; it talks about an experience of intimacy, of connection, of what it means to be bonded with another person. And if that doesn't make its way into the narrative, then we're just losing so much.
Yeah. Disclosure in dating. A young man is about to meet someone. He has not mastered his impulse usage, as we've discovered in this podcast, that probably most don't. What is the correct way? What do you mention? How do you mention? When do you mention? Do you need to mention?
I don't think I fully worked this out, to be honest. I work with individuals. I don't really work with couples and that particular dynamic. My wife, I think, would have a much better answer than me. That's where she lives. But for me, there's a real difference. Like, I have a clarity that I live with. If this is pathological, if this is inherently problematic for the person, and not what we would call a typical struggle that a person's going through, I think there's a mandate. A person should know that I'm making my way into a relationship, there's going to be significant struggle in this space. And I think that becomes very important. I think it's much more gray when it comes to the non-pathological sharing. And I think what ends up happening often is that it's the shame that gets shared. And to me, if you're going to share something, you want to share it not from a place of shame, but from a place of like the engagement of the struggle itself. But if it's shame, then the only thing the other person hears is I'm a failure. And no one wants to marry a failure. And no one's attracted to a failure. They're attracted to, someone who's working on themselves. So I think if it's presented in a way of this is a challenge, this is an inherent challenge, and I'm working on it, and it's not coming from like the degree of like I'm absolute failure, and I think there's room for that type of dialogue. But I think we need to know that across the genders, there are very different attitudes with these things. Guys live in a very different reality than women do in our world with these topics. Because it's presented like to women, it's like there's right and wrong, and it's black and white, and what are we talking about? What's the conversation? And from a male perspective, they're like, it's not possible to approach it through that lens. Because like we said, over 90% of men are engaging in some degree of struggle. And how do we just turn it into like this black and white thing? And there's a real divide, even when you speak to therapists. And when you ask the question, is masturbation in marriage infidelity? You ask that to a group of male therapists and you ask it to a group of female therapists from the same community, you're going to get diametrically opposed answers. Yeah. And that says something. It says a lot about the lived experience. We have different experiences.
Yeah. I want to honor your time, so I just want to go out with this more general question. If you had an idea, a message, not in regards to our work, or something that you've acquired a little bit in your own life that you felt like if this is a way, if people were to know this or do this or think about this, it could really impact in some ways their journey through life, what would that be?
Well, I think the way I would answer it with the way you proposed the question, like if a person knows that life is a journey, just that, and life is not, the destination is for a different universe. It's not for us. And if they understand that alone, that gives them so much flexibility to tend to the journey, to be on the journey, to embark on that journey. I think when I ask the question like that, inevitably my mind goes to places like just love more. It's one of the greatest things we could do. I think it's complicated to say that because it's not so easy to do. And it sounds just very cheesy, but it's something I really feel. And I think that as a world, I think we're getting better at it. I think we're trying to love more. And it all starts with ourselves first. But I think that first idea, just knowing that this is a journey and it's about bettering ourselves. It's about getting closer to the essential self that we were given before we even interacted with people. And living that way, it's a gift. It's a gift that we have an opportunity to journey in such a manner.
I think that they're really connected, that if we live life as seeing it as a journey and giving ourselves that space to be on a journey so we can love ourselves more and we can love others more as they travel on this journey.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much. I do want to do a part 2 because I have so many more things that I want to talk about, but I definitely really deeply appreciated this conversation. In the beginning, I was a bit more nervous, and just it became such a Geschmack of Verbringen, and I really deeply enjoyed it. Thank you.
Me too. It was a dear honor. And the fact that you called it a Verbringen makes it even better. Because that's it. We have these moments in life where we just get to be with people in a real way, and what a gift. Just what a gift. Yeah. And I feel in your presence that I could be more myself, and I thank you for that. because you've invited me into that space. You said I'd appreciate your realness, and that's very comforting for me.
I'll say thank you, Dr. Akiva / Kiwi.
Mm.
It really meant a lot to me. Thank you.
Thank you, brother. A real honor.
Take care.
All the best. Have a beautiful day.
You too.